Have you ever looked at the clock late at night and asked yourself a very uncomfortable question? The kind of question that most people try to avoid because it touches something deep inside the heart. And the question is simple but powerful. What are you really doing with your life while time keeps moving forward and forward without stopping for anyone? Not for the rich, not for the poor, not for the strong, not for the tired, because the clock keeps ticking and the world keeps moving, whether you are ready or not. And maybe right now you are carrying a dream inside your chest that feels heavy, a dream that people around you do not understand, a dream that sometimes even you start to doubt when life becomes difficult. And that is exactly why today we need to talk about a man who once stood exactly where you might be standing right now, confused, uncertain, but burning with a quiet fire inside his mind. And that man was Henry Ford, a boy who was born on a simple farm and who later changed the way the entire world moves, the way people travel, the way cities grow, and even the way work itself is organized, because his ideas did not just build cars. His ideas built a new rhythm for modern life. And before we continue this journey together here on the channel English to Inspire, I want to welcome you warmly and ask you in a simple and honest way to subscribe if these stories help you grow. Because every story here is not only about famous people, but also about the hidden strength that exists inside you. Now, listen carefully. Because when people look at success, they often see only the final moment, the big factories, the millions of cars, the name that everyone recognizes, but they rarely see the long road that comes before the victory, the silent years when nobody believes in you, the nights when doubt whispers in your mind, the mornings when you must wake up and try again even when yesterday ended in failure. And that is exactly where the real story begins, not with success, but with hunger, not with applause, but with questions. Because Henry Ford once asked a question that most people never even think about asking, and the question was simple but dangerous for the world as it existed at that time. Why are cars only for rich people? Why should only a small group enjoy the power of machines while ordinary families walk long distances or depend on slow transportation? And when he asked this question, many people laughed. Many people shook their heads. Many people said the same old sentence that kills millions of dreams every year. They said, "It is impossible. It has always been this way. Do not waste your time. Get a normal job. Live a normal life. Stop dreaming so big." But here is the truth that you must understand today. The world changes because one person refuses to accept the limits that everyone else accepts. One person looks at the same reality and says, "No, there must be another way." And Henry Ford was exactly that kind of person. Quiet but stubborn, patient but determined, a man who believed that machines could serve ordinary people, and that belief slowly became a mission that would push him through failure, criticism, financial loss, and years of uncertainty. And as we move deeper into this story, you will begin to see that the real battle was not only about building a car. The real battle was inside the mind of a man who refused to stop asking questions. And the story truly begins many years earlier on a quiet farm where a curious boy started looking at the world in a very different way. Long before factories, long before millions of cars, and long before the world knew the name Henry Ford, there was only a quiet farm, wide fields, long days of physical work, and a young boy who often looked at the world around him with a strange feeling inside his mind. Because while most children on the farm accepted life exactly as it was, this boy kept asking questions that did not leave him alone. Questions about movement, about machines, about why things worked the way they did. And although the farm was full of animals, tools, and simple routines that repeated every day, his attention was always pulled toward anything that moved with gears, springs, or wheels, because deep inside his mind something was waking up, a curiosity that would slowly grow into an obsession. He was born in 1863 in a rural area where life followed the rhythm of nature. Sunrise meant work and sunset meant rest, and most boys were expected to grow into farmers like their fathers, learning how to plant crops, repair fences, and care for animals. But young Henry felt something different in his chest whenever he looked at a machine, because machines seemed alive in a way that fields did not. And when he saw tools being used or watches being repaired, he would stand nearby, quietly watching every movement with deep concentration, trying to understand how small pieces could work together to create motion. And this curiosity became stronger when he received a simple pocket watch as a teenager, because instead of only using the watch to check the time like everyone else, he opened it, studied it, and slowly learned how each tiny piece worked together. And soon neighbors started bringing him broken watches because the boy who was supposed to become a farmer was suddenly becoming the best watch repairer in the area. But the farm still expected him to follow the traditional path, and that created a silent conflict inside his mind, because he respected his family and understood the value of hard work. Yet every time he looked at the fields, he felt that his life was meant for something else, something connected to invention, movement, and the future. And this feeling grew stronger when he first saw a portable steam engine moving through the countryside, because in that moment he realized that machines could transform the way people lived and worked. And the sight of that powerful machine moving slowly across the land stayed in his mind like a spark that refused to disappear, because for the first time he saw the possibility that technology could change the rhythm of human life. So while other young men were satisfied with the life in front of them, Henry began thinking about leaving the farm to learn more about machines. And this decision was not easy, because it meant stepping into uncertainty, leaving the familiar world behind, and facing the risk of failure. But something important was already happening inside his mind, something that many people feel, but very few people follow, and that was a quiet voice that says there is more waiting for you beyond the comfortable path. And although the world around him still expected him to live a normal life, the curiosity inside him kept growing stronger every day, pushing him slowly toward a decision that would change everything, because sooner or later he would have to leave the farm and step into a much larger world where his hunger for understanding machines would be tested in ways he could not yet imagine. When Henry Ford finally made the decision to leave the quiet farm of his childhood, he was still very young, but inside his mind there was already a powerful determination growing stronger every day, because he knew that if he stayed in the same place doing the same work forever, his curiosity about machines would slowly die, and that thought felt more frightening than the risk of failure. So at the age of 16, he left home and traveled to the city of Detroit, where factories were beginning to grow and where the future of machines was slowly taking shape. And although the city offered opportunity, it also brought difficulty, because a young man with little money and limited experience had to prove himself in workshops filled with older and more experienced workers, and the first years were not glamorous or exciting as some people imagine when they hear the word success, because his days were filled with long hours, small wages, and constant learning. But every broken machine, every tool, and every mechanical problem became a classroom where he quietly built the knowledge that would later change the world. In those early years, Ford worked as an apprentice machinist, repairing engines, studying metal parts, and learning how complex systems worked together. And although the work was exhausting, he felt alive because every day he was closer to the world that fascinated him. And slowly he began to understand something important that many dreamers ignore, which is that dreams require skill, patience, and discipline, because imagination alone cannot build machines. And this lesson became even clearer when he returned to the farm for a period of time and started working with steam engines used in agriculture, because these powerful machines showed him how technology could replace heavy human labor. And once again the same question began to grow in his mind. If machines could transform farming then, what else could they transform in human life? But life was not giving him success yet, and this is the part of the story that most people try to skip because failure feels uncomfortable. Yet failure is exactly where the strongest lessons live. And Ford experienced this reality when he began experimenting with gasoline engines during his free time while working as an engineer at the Edison Illuminating Company, a job that gave him stability, but also demanded long hours. And even though he worked all day, he spent his nights building and testing ideas in a small workshop, often surrounded by metal pieces, tools, and unfinished designs. And many of those early experiments did not work as he expected. Engines failed, parts broke, and plans had to be rebuilt again and again. But instead of giving up, he treated each mistake like a teacher, pointing him toward a better solution. Then came one of the most important and painful chapters of his early career, because his first attempts to create automobile companies ended in failure. Investors lost patience. Disagreements grew inside the companies, and projects collapsed before reaching real success. And imagine the pressure that situation created, because people around him began to doubt his ideas. Critics said his vision was unrealistic, and the safe path would have been to stop chasing the dream and simply keep a stable engineering job. But something inside Ford refused to surrender, because he believed that the problem was not the dream itself, but the process he was using to reach it. And this stubborn belief would soon push him toward a breakthrough that began in a small workshop late at night, where a strange new vehicle was slowly taking shape. By the time Henry Ford reached his early 30s, the dream inside his mind was no longer just curiosity or experimentation. It had become a powerful obsession that refused to stay quiet, because every time he looked at the growing world of machines, he saw a future that most people around him could not yet imagine. And while wealthy inventors and engineers were already building automobiles as luxury toys for the rich, Ford kept repeating a simple but radical idea inside his mind. The automobile should not belong only to the rich. The automobile should belong to ordinary people, farmers, workers, families, people who needed to move faster and live better. And although this idea sounded simple, it challenged the entire business logic of the time, because cars were expensive, slow to build, and produced in small numbers by skilled craftsmen, which meant that only wealthy customers could afford them. But Ford refused to accept that reality as permanent, and this is where the power of obsession begins to reveal itself, because when a person truly believes in an idea, that idea begins to shape the way they see the world. And Ford started looking at every mechanical problem with one central question in mind. How can this be made simpler? How can this be made faster? How can this be made cheaper without losing quality? And while others were focused on building beautiful and expensive machines for a small elite group, he was imagining thousands and then millions of ordinary people driving a reliable vehicle that they could actually afford. And many investors and engineers laughed at this vision because it sounded unrealistic, since building cars was still slow and expensive, and they believed that lowering prices would destroy profits. But Ford saw the situation differently, because he believed that if production became faster and simpler, then the price could fall and millions of customers would suddenly appear. However, believing in an idea and proving that idea are two very different things, and this is where the pressure began to grow around him, because Ford had already experienced failed companies and frustrated investors, and the business world was starting to question whether his ideas were practical or only dreams that sounded good, but could never work in reality. And imagine how heavy that moment must have felt, standing between a powerful vision and a world that was slowly losing patience with your experiments, because the clock was ticking. Investors wanted results and critics were becoming louder. Yet instead of abandoning the dream, Ford returned again and again to his workshop, where he continued experimenting with gasoline engines and lightweight designs, convinced that the answer was hiding somewhere inside the mechanical details. Night after night he worked surrounded by metal pieces, gears, pipes, and tools, adjusting designs, testing engines, and imagining a machine that could finally prove that his vision was possible. And slowly one project began to stand out from the others, a strange lightweight vehicle that looked simple but carried the heart of his dream inside it. And although the world outside still doubted him, this small machine would soon become the first real step toward transforming transportation forever. Because one night in a modest workshop, the silence was broken by the sound of an engine coming to life. And the moment that machine began to move forward, something important changed, not only in the life of Henry Ford, but in the direction of the modern world itself. One quiet night in 1896, while most of the city of Detroit was sleeping, Henry Ford stood inside a small workshop surrounded by tools, metal pieces, and the silent evidence of many experiments that had failed before this moment. And if you had walked into that room, you would not have seen a grand laboratory or a rich inventor with expensive equipment. You would have seen a determined engineer working with limited resources but with a powerful idea burning inside his mind. Because for months he had been building a strange machine that many people believed would never work, a lightweight vehicle powered by a gasoline engine that he hoped could move without horses. And although today this idea sounds normal, at that time it was still something rare and uncertain, because automobiles were experimental machines that often broke down and required constant adjustment. The vehicle he built was simple, almost fragile, compared to the massive machines people imagined when they thought about engines. And it had 4 thin bicycle wheels, a small gasoline engine, and a light frame that looked more like a mechanical experiment than a finished product. Yet inside that simple structure lived a bold vision that Ford refused to abandon, because he believed that if he could make the machine move reliably, then the rest of the future would slowly become possible. And after months of preparation, the moment of truth finally arrived when he prepared to test the vehicle that would later be known as the quadricycle, a name that sounded modest but represented years of curiosity, learning, and persistence. There was one unexpected problem, however, and it shows how unpredictable the road to innovation can be. Because when Ford tried to move the machine out of the workshop, he realized that the doorway was too small for the vehicle to pass through, which meant that before the test could even begin, he had to break part of the wall to create enough space for the machine to exit the building. And imagine that moment for a second, standing there with a brand new invention that might fail or succeed, while literally breaking the wall of the workshop just to give the machine a chance to see the outside world. And this small detail tells us something important about innovation, because progress often requires breaking old structures that were never designed for the future. Finally, the quadricycle rolled out into the quiet street, and when Ford started the engine, the small machine came to life with a mechanical sound that must have felt like music after so many months of effort. And slowly the vehicle began to move forward under its own power. No horses, no external force, only the engine and the design that Ford had imagined again and again in his mind. And that moment may have looked simple to an observer, but it carried enormous meaning because it proved that his ideas could work in the real world. And although the quadricycle was only a first step and still far from the practical automobile he wanted to build, it gave him something that every inventor desperately needs after long periods of doubt: proof that the dream was not impossible. From that night forward, the mission became clearer and stronger, because now Ford knew that automobiles powered by gasoline engines could work. And the next challenge would be even bigger, transforming that fragile experiment into a reliable product that ordinary people could actually use, which meant facing investors again, building a real company, and entering a competitive industry that was already full of ambitious engineers. Yet the sound of that first moving machine continued echoing in his mind, reminding him that sometimes the smallest victory can open the door to a revolution that the entire world is about to experience. After the night when the small quadricycle finally moved through the streets of Detroit, something important changed inside the mind of Henry Ford, because for the first time his dream was no longer only an idea inside a workshop full of tools and metal parts. It had become a living machine that proved the future he imagined might actually be possible. And that small victory gave him the confidence to move forward again, even though the road ahead was still full of uncertainty. Because building one experimental vehicle is very different from building thousands of reliable automobiles that ordinary people can trust. And Ford understood that if he wanted to change the world, he would have to step out of the role of a lone inventor and become something much more difficult, a business builder capable of turning ideas into a real company. But the journey into business was not smooth at all, and this is another moment where many dreamers would have given up, because Ford's early companies struggled with disagreements, financial pressure, and conflicting visions among investors who were more interested in quick profits than in his long-term dream of creating affordable cars for the masses. And one company after another collapsed, before reaching true success, leaving behind frustration, lost money, and critics who began to question whether Ford's vision would ever work in the real world. And imagine the emotional weight of those moments when people around you start saying the same painful sentence again and again. Maybe your idea is not as good as you think. Maybe you should accept a safer life. Maybe you should stop chasing something that keeps failing. Yet Ford refused to accept defeat because every failure helped him understand the industry more deeply. And slowly he realized that if he wanted to build cars for ordinary people, he needed full control over the direction of the company, the design of the vehicles, and the method of production. And this realization pushed him to try once more, gathering a new group of investors who believed in his determination and who were willing to give him another chance. And in 1903, that effort finally gave birth to a new company that would soon become famous across the world. The Ford Motor Company, a business that began with only a small team, limited resources, and a dream that still sounded unrealistic to many observers. At the beginning, the company did not produce millions of cars or giant factories. Instead, it started with small production numbers and constant experimentation, building vehicles that slowly improved in reliability and performance. And Ford worked tirelessly to refine his designs while also searching for ways to simplify the production process, because he knew that the real breakthrough would not come only from a better car, but from a better way to build that car. A method that could reduce time, lower cost, and allow thousands of vehicles to leave the factory every year instead of only a few expensive machines made for wealthy buyers. This determination slowly began to produce results as Ford Motor Company released new models that gained attention for their practicality and mechanical strength. And with each improvement, Ford moved closer to the true goal that had guided him from the beginning, a vehicle that ordinary families could afford and trust. And although the world still did not fully understand the scale of the transformation that was coming, the foundation had finally been built. Because the company was now alive, the mission was clear. And inside the factories, a revolutionary idea about production was quietly taking shape, an idea that would soon move faster than anyone in the industry had ever imagined. As the young Ford Motor Company slowly grew under the leadership of Henry Ford, the world still believed that automobiles would remain expensive machines built slowly by skilled craftsmen. Because at that time, each car was assembled almost like a piece of art, with workers building large portions of the vehicle in one place, adjusting parts by hand, and taking many hours or even days to complete a single automobile, and this process made cars rare and costly, which meant that only wealthy customers could buy them. Yet Ford continued asking the same question that had guided him for years. How can we build cars faster so ordinary people can afford them? This question slowly pushed him toward one of the most important ideas in the history of modern industry, an idea that looked simple when people first heard it, but would soon transform factories across the entire planet. And that idea was the moving assembly line, a system where the product moves step by step through the factory, while each worker performs a specific task instead of building the whole machine from beginning to end. And although versions of assembly work already existed in other industries, Ford and his team studied the process deeply and redesigned it specifically for automobile production, carefully analyzing each movement, each tool, and each step required to build a car, because they believed that if every action became simpler and faster, then the entire production system could accelerate dramatically. When the first moving assembly line was introduced in 1913 inside Ford's factories, the change was almost unbelievable, because the time required to build a single automobile dropped dramatically, from more than 12 hours of work to only about 90 minutes. And imagine what that means for a moment. A process that once consumed almost an entire day could suddenly be completed in a fraction of that time, which meant the factory could produce far more vehicles while using fewer resources. And this transformation allowed Ford to do something that shocked the entire business world. He could lower the price of his cars again and again while still growing the company, because efficiency had replaced slow craftsmanship as the engine of production. The most famous result of this system was the Model T, a simple but strong automobile that became the symbol of Ford's mission to bring transportation to ordinary families. And year after year, the price of the Model T dropped as production increased, allowing farmers, workers, teachers, and small business owners to buy a car for the first time in their lives. And suddenly roads began filling with vehicles that once existed only for the wealthy. Cities expanded, travel became easier, and the rhythm of daily life started changing across entire countries. All because one man refused to accept that automobiles should remain rare luxuries. But success at this scale also created new challenges inside the factories, because the work on the assembly line was repetitive and demanding, and many workers struggled with the long hours and strict routines required to keep the production system running smoothly. And Ford knew that if he wanted the system to survive, he would have to make another bold decision that few business leaders were willing to consider, a decision about wages and respect that would shock the world almost as much as the assembly line itself. As the revolutionary factories of Ford Motor Company continued producing thousands of vehicles using the moving assembly line, Henry Ford began facing a serious problem that threatened the entire system he had worked so hard to build. Because although the assembly line made production faster and cheaper, it also created a kind of work that many employees found exhausting and repetitive, and day after day workers stood in the same place, performing the same small action again and again, while the line kept moving without stopping, which meant that many employees quickly became tired of the job and decided to leave the factory, creating a constant cycle of hiring and training new workers. And this high turnover slowed production and created instability inside the company. At that time, most business leaders responded to worker dissatisfaction in the same predictable way. They lowered expectations, hired new labor when people quit, and accepted that factories were difficult places where employees were easily replaced. But Ford began looking at the problem differently, because he believed that workers were not just parts of a machine, but human beings whose stability and motivation could directly influence the success of the company. And this perspective led him toward one of the boldest decisions in the history of industrial business, a decision that shocked newspapers, competitors, and economists across the country when it was announced in 1914. Ford declared that his company would begin paying workers $5 per day, which was roughly double the average industrial wage at the time. And this decision sounded almost unbelievable, because many business leaders believed it would destroy profits and create financial chaos inside the company. Yet Ford saw the situation through a different lens, because he understood something simple, but powerful about human behavior. When workers feel respected and financially secure, they become more stable, more productive, and more loyal to the organization that supports them. And he also realized something even more revolutionary. If his workers earned better wages, they could eventually become customers who could afford to buy the very cars they were helping to build. The reaction from the business world was immediate and intense. Critics called the decision reckless and irresponsible. Newspapers debated whether Ford had lost his mind, and competing companies predicted that the policy would collapse under its own cost. Yet the results told a completely different story, because the higher wages quickly attracted thousands of job applicants who were eager to work. At Ford's factories, employee turnover dropped dramatically, productivity increased, and the company gained a powerful reputation as a place where workers could build stable lives while participating in one of the most exciting industries of the modern age. This bold decision did more than stabilize Ford's workforce. It also helped expand the middle class by giving industrial workers the income necessary to participate in the consumer economy. And slowly the same workers who once struggled to survive could begin dreaming about owning the products they helped manufacture, including the famous Model T. And through this combination of efficient production and higher wages, Ford helped reshape the relationship between industry, workers, and consumers, proving that a company could grow stronger when it invested in people rather than treating them as disposable labor. Yet even with these achievements, the path of leadership was not free from criticism and controversy, because success on such a massive scale brings new pressures, new mistakes, and new challenges that test the character of any leader. As the influence of Henry Ford continued expanding across the industrial world, the success of Ford Motor Company became almost impossible to ignore, because millions of automobiles were now traveling on roads that had once been quiet paths for horses and carriages, and families who had never imagined owning a personal vehicle were suddenly exploring towns, visiting relatives, and building new businesses thanks to affordable transportation. Yet something important happens when a company grows this large and this powerful. The challenges change, the pressure increases, and the decisions of one leader begin affecting not just employees and customers, but entire industries and communities. During these years, Ford was celebrated as a brilliant innovator who had transformed manufacturing. Yet leadership at such a scale is rarely simple, because the same strong personality that helps someone build a revolutionary company can also create tension when the world continues changing around them. And Ford sometimes struggled to adapt to new trends in the automobile industry as competitors began offering vehicles with more colors, more features, and more stylistic variety, while he remained deeply loyal to the simplicity and efficiency that had made the Model T famous, repeating the well-known idea that customers could have the car in any color they wanted, as long as it was black. And although this statement carried humor, it also revealed the challenge of balancing innovation with tradition. Competitors such as Alfred P. Sloan and the growing power of General Motors began introducing strategies that focused on offering different models, styles, and price levels for different customers, and slowly the automobile market became more competitive and complex, forcing Ford Motor Company to rethink its approach after years of dominating the industry with a single powerful idea. And this moment reminds us of an important truth about success. The strategy that wins the first race does not always win the second one, because markets evolve, technology evolves, and leaders must evolve as well if they want their influence to continue. Ford also faced criticism for certain personal views and management decisions that generated controversy during his lifetime, which shows us that even individuals who build extraordinary achievements remain human and imperfect, capable of both brilliant ideas and serious mistakes. And this reality is important because many people imagine success as a clean and perfect story where heroes never struggle with flaws, yet real life rarely works that way. And the true value of studying figures like Henry Ford is not to see them as perfect icons, but to understand how determination, creativity, and resilience can coexist with human limitations. Despite these challenges, the impact of Ford's ideas remained enormous, because the assembly line transformed global manufacturing. Affordable automobiles reshaped cities and transportation, and the philosophy of mass production combined with higher wages influenced generations of business leaders. And by the later years of his life, the boy who once repaired watches on a quiet farm had already changed the rhythm of modern society, leaving behind a legacy that would continue shaping industries long after his own journey reached its final chapter. A chapter that brings us to the deeper question waiting inside this entire story: what can an ordinary person learn from the life of a man who refused to accept the limits that everyone else believed were permanent? When people look back at the life of Henry Ford, they often see factories, automobiles, and the enormous influence of Ford Motor Company spreading across the modern world. Yet the deeper meaning of his story is not only about machines or industry, it is about the quiet power of a simple idea combined with relentless persistence, because the boy who once walked through fields on a modest farm did not begin with wealth, powerful connections, or a clear path to success. Instead, he began with curiosity, the kind of curiosity that refuses to stay silent when something in the world does not make sense. And that curiosity slowly grew into a question that shaped his entire life. Why should technology serve only the rich when it could serve everyone? Think about that for a moment, because this question carries a powerful lesson for anyone who feels stuck today. Because many people believe success begins with money, talent, or perfect conditions. Yet Ford's story shows something different. Success often begins with a person who looks at the world and refuses to accept that things must remain the way they have always been, and when that refusal becomes strong enough, it turns into action, and action repeated day after day slowly becomes progress. Even when failure appears again and again along the road, and Ford experienced many of those failures, companies that collapsed, investors who lost patience, critics who believed his dream was unrealistic. But he kept returning to the same mission because the vision in his mind was stronger than the fear of disappointment. This is where the story becomes personal for you, because the real value of studying a life like Henry Ford's is not only to admire history, but to ask a difficult question about your own path. What are you doing with the hours that are passing through your hands every single day? Because the same clock that ticked in Ford's workshop is ticking in your life right now, the same 24 hours that he used to experiment, fail, learn, and try again are the exact same 24 hours that exist in your day today. And that means the difference between ordinary lives and extraordinary impact often comes down to responsibility. The responsibility to use time intentionally instead of allowing fear, distraction, or comfort to to slowly consume it. You do not need to build factories or invent automobiles to apply the lesson hidden inside this story, because the deeper message is about mindset, about hunger, about the courage to keep moving when progress feels slow. And if you listen carefully, you can almost hear the echo of Ford's philosophy in a few simple words that carry enormous power. Keep going, keep learning, keep improving, because every improvement creates momentum, and momentum eventually creates transformation. And the world we live in today is full of opportunities waiting for people who are willing to think differently and work patiently toward their vision. So now the question returns to you, the same kind of question that quietly begins many great journeys. What dream are you carrying that you have been postponing because the road looks difficult, because the risk feels uncomfortable, or because other people have already told you that it is unrealistic? And if that dream still exists inside you, then remember the lesson of the boy who once repaired watches on a farm and later helped move the entire world forward. Because progress begins when one person decides that the future can be better than the present, and then chooses to act on that belief every single day. And the world is still waiting for people who are brave enough to think that way. So the only real question left is whether you will continue waiting for the perfect moment, or whether you will start moving now, because the clock is already running and the future is watching.